Good evening. So, it's been reported today that Nick Reiner had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. And as of recent weeks or a couple of months, his medication had been changed. And he had become more erratic, and his behavior was escalating. He was decompressing, all of the above. And ultimately, it culminated into what happened late Saturday night, early Sunday morning, nearly a week ago. So, I've heard reports when Nick was 11, he would have the most horrible tantrums where his father would have to put him in a bear hug until Nick was able to calm himself down. I recall in one of those interviews when they were promoting that movie that he had done with his father, out of Nick's own mouth, he said one of the reasons why he was doing the drugs was to uh, quiet the noise. And when I first heard that, I thought, quiet the noise? What noise? And I thought of schizophrenia. Maybe he was having auditory hallucinations, hearing things. So the reports today is that he's been diagnosed with schizophrenia. Now, if you don't know anything about schizophrenia, you really can't be diagnosed until you are about 19 years old. A lot of times, schizophrenia presents itself between the ages of 19 and 25. It can present itself in adolescence, like, 14, 15, but they cannot diagnose it as schizophrenia because it might look like schizophrenia, but end up being something else. So that's why you have to wait until you are 19 years old. Another thing about schizophrenia is that it's genetic and it skips a generation. So if Nick has schizophrenia, that means somewhere, whether it's in his paternal grandfather's family line or his maternal grandmother or grandfather's family line, and you can add grandmother in his paternal family line. Somebody up in there, whether it was a cousin or an uncle of Rob Reiner or aunt of Rob Reiner or uncle or aunt of Michelle. Somebody had schizophrenia. It skips a generation. Now, we're going to explore my confusion. Okay? And don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that he doesn't have schizophrenia. I'm inclined to believe that very much. That's not where my confusion is. I had a cousin, much, much older than I. I mean, the last time I remember seeing him, I was about 6 years old. And he was about 20. And he was going to Sarah Lawrence, and he was studying to become a doctor. In his second year at the college, the university, they called my aunt and uncle and said that they must come because my cousin was having some serious mental issues. Well, I also had a cousin who was a contemporary of my aunt and uncle, meaning they were about the same age. He was a psychiatrist. So when they called my psychiatrist cousin, he diagnosed Roger right over the phone to them. When they explained to them what they had been told of his behavior and what was going on, my psychiatrist cousin immediately knew that it was schizophrenia. So my cousin, I call him Mark, he had a schizophrenic episode the first time in his second year at college, studying to become a doctor. Well, my cousin Mark, the way my aunt and uncle dealt with it was that he had been in a facility from that point on. And at times he was able to come home for the weekend, but pretty much he lived the rest of his life until he was in his early 60s. And I believe it was like in 2021 in the facility. He did something, put like a puzzle piece or something in his mouth and choked to death. Just about 4 years ago. But Mark had lived in the facility from way back in the early 70s up until 2021. He had not murdered anybody or anything like that. He just lived in a facility. My aunt and uncle had the money to pay for him to be in a facility all these decades. And I'm sure the facility he was in cost tens of thousands of dollars a month. Now, he was there just because of his condition. It wasn't like he was remanded there by the courts for any reason. He didn't murder anybody. He just had schizophrenia. Over the past, since 2016, I've been working with individuals living with schizophrenia. And even more intensely, I've been working with people and family members dealing with loved ones who have schizophrenia for the past 2 years at another position, at another job. I'm confused about this situation with Nick Reiner. Number one, and please understand, I'm not blaming anybody. I'm not blaming his parents. God bless them. They loved their son. And now it became clear to me, because I just thought, he was just having a drug addiction and that was causing this mental illness. But now I understand when Rob said that they knew their son better than the therapist, And now I understand why they kept him close living on the property, because it wasn't just a drug addiction. It was him using all kind of drugs, self-medicating, trying to, kill the noise. And so when you have a compound issue, and I don't think schizophrenia is his only diagnosis besides substance abuse. I think he might have something like bipolar. But when you have compound issues like that, I can see why his parents, who loved him dearly, would want to keep him close. Now, all that I said in yesterday's video about having him live in Texas and buying him his own house and he needs to stay over there, I was speaking under the pretense that it was only a substance abuse issue. So, with the schizophrenia diagnosis, which I'm leaning more into the fact that when it's all said and done, he's going to go to some comfy facility with a beautiful, sprawling campus, and there'll be swimming pools, and he'll be able to play cricket and lacrosse and horseback ride, and he'll have his own apartment there, and it'll be a nice, luxurious, cushy place that will probably cost about $1 million a year for him to reside. And he most likely will be there for the rest of his life, living a nice, cushy life. But getting back to the situation at hand, they said again that in recent weeks or months, his medication had changed. The doctors had changed his medication, and it was making him out of his head. My confusion is, why wasn't he placed in a facility until the doctors can stabilize him on his medication? That could not have been a hard thing for his parents to do. He's been under a doctor's care for his schizophrenia. The medication was changed and his behavior is becoming more erratic, and he's decompressing and all of these things. It would have been no issue to have him committed until he is stabilized. They probably would have had changed his medication again. And one thing about medication, when you're dealing with treating individuals living with schizophrenia, oftentimes you have to try different things in terms of medication until you can find the right concoction that stabilizes them and allows them to function and live a regular life. Now, the problem with that is when someone with schizophrenia gets on medication and it starts working and they start feeling better, usually they have an episode. They're taken to the hospital. They're given medication. They are released after they are stabilized, and they continue to take their medication while they're back at home in society, and they're feeling good. And then they begin to tell themselves, hey, I feel normal, like my regular self. I don't need this medication anymore. They stop taking their medication, and next thing you know, they're having another episode. And so people living with schizophrenia, they must understand, and these are one of the issues I've been addressing with people living with schizophrenia, trying to get them to understand and make a commitment to themselves. Number one, understand that you have to take this medication for the rest of your life. No matter how good you feel, you must not talk yourself into um, believing that you no longer need the medication. Because as soon as you do that, an episode is going to come and you're going to be back to square one. So if you're feeling better, that's wonderful. You got your life back. You can continue to work and do all the things you want to do. But just know you need to be on this medication for the rest of your life. And so again, my confusion is coming in as to why, when they saw his behavior escalating, when they saw his facial, when they just saw that Nick was no longer Nick, why didn't they just take him back to the hospital? And you can't tell me, I mean, I know the mental health, medical community and system is broken. Nothing is perfect in this world or in this country because there are no perfect people running this shit. But you have access to better medical care when you are in the kind of tax bracket as a Rob and Michelle Reiner. That's where my confusion lies. If Michael Jackson can find a doctor to chop his face up and turn him into a white woman, why couldn't Nick and Michelle Reiner take them back to the psychiatrist and have them in the psychiatric hospital where they can change his medication or whatever it is that they need to do and monitor him until he's stabilized? Why did they not do that? There lies my confusion. You see, your son is decompensating. You see, his mental health is deteriorating. You don't take him to the hospital, you take him to a Hollywood party. I'm confused. Do you think I have a right to be confused about this? To the point where you are afraid to leave him by himself. You don't take him to his psychiatrist. You don't call his psychiatrist. You take him to Conan and Bride O'Brien's Christmas party, where he shows up at a black tie affair wearing a hoodie and begins to annoy guests by walking up to them and asking them if they are famous. And a shouting match between Rob and Nick ensues, most likely because of his behavior. 'Cause, 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 'c you know that his mental health is deteriorating. And not even at that point do you call the psychiatrist. I hear from the reports that Nick's behavior was so erratic at this party that members of the Christmas party, guests I should say, wanted to call 911, and Coleman and O'Brien stopped them from calling 911. Had they called 911 and it was presented to the officers that, hey, he's been diagnosed with schizophrenia, his medication has been recently changed and it's not working, he's getting worse, he should have been taken to a facility right then and there. Assessed by a psychiatrist or a psychiatric nurse or a psychiatric nurse practitioner, however it goes, and tweak his medication and keep him there until he is stable and well enough to be released back to his parents. For the past 2 years, I've been dealing with people in the community, family members, with sons and daughters, nieces and nephews, grandchildren, who are suffering with schizophrenia and finding it very, very hard to get them help. That's where my position came in. I worked with the mobile crisis unit, which I think is an excellent service, because too many people living with schizophrenia and experiencing an episode, and when 911 was called, the cops would just come out and shoot and kill them. But with the mobile crisis unit, the concept was to have a clinician ride with the police officer. So when a mental health call came through, the police officer and the clinician will arrive, and the clinician, after the police officer gets out the car and assesses that everything is safe, then the clinician will come and engage with the individual who is experiencing a crisis, a mental health crisis. And if the clinician deemed that the individual should go to a hospital, sometimes the individual will voluntarily go to the hospital. But if they were in the middle of a crisis and did not volunteer to go to the hospital, and they were able to be 1013. I live on the East Coast. It is called the 1013 Baker Act, where you are involuntarily transported to the hospital. On the West Coast, out in California, it's a 5150. That's their code. He could have very well been 5150. Why was he not? Were they listening to Nick? With Nick saying, he hates the facilities, he hates going to the hospital, it's not helping, it's not working? Did they think they should listen to Nick and his mental illness and just say, we'll keep him with us and we'll keep a close eye on him because Nick doesn't want to go? We love Nick. And we're going to do what Nick says. And we're going to listen to how Nick feels and what he says. And we're going to go with that. I shudder to think that they allowed somebody with a mental illness to call the shots. And please don't act like that doesn't happen, because it does a lot. Hey, I've heard about Alzheimer's disease, but I really didn't know about it until my father came down with it and I was his sole caretaker. Now understand, my father was a very strong, intimidating individual. And so when I brought him from Florida to New York to live with me so I could care for him in his illness, because this is daddy, this is my strong, intimidating father whom you don't tell what to do. For several months, I was allowing him to make decisions until I realized myself that the roles had to change, where he needed to listen to me and do what I say. That was not a very easy feat to overcome, especially with the type of man my father was. But I could no longer allow him to make decisions. I'm confused. So I'm sure more information will come out, and perhaps information will be divulged that will alleviate some, if not all, of my confusion as to why this man was deteriorating mentally. And instead of taking him to the doctor, they took him to a Christmas party. I'm confused. Anyway, that's all I went live to do, was to express my confusion. And I look forward to getting some answers in the coming hours or in the coming days. And I will leave you with this. No matter what, I know that Rob and Michelle loved their children. I don't think they loved one child more than the other. And they were committed as parents to help them, to love them, to care for them, no matter what. Somebody asked yesterday in the video about Brian McKnight, and I did take several minutes to think about it. Brian McKnight is at the opposite spectrum of a Rob and Michelle Reiner. Rob and Michelle Reiner loved their son Nick. Now I'm only just mentioning Nick because of his issues. They loved all their children. But Brian McKnight is the complete opposite. He could give a fuck about his boys. In fact, one of them recently was dying of cancer. Oh my God. I think he wrote his son a note, or was it over a phone call or something? But he was saying stuff to his dying son. Well, the reason you're dying is because of this and that and the other and your family and your mother and this is why you're dying. So when you die, just know that they are the reason that you're dead. I was like, what the fuck? Complete polar opposite of Rob and Michelle Reiner. Rest in peace, my dears. Rest in peace. I'm going to go to the chat real quick. And who do we have? Jeremiah. Hello, Jeremiah. And Hammer Nation Funk 6465. Hi. Bunny Blitz YT. You donated $69 on Super Chat. For real? My goodness. Bunny Blitz, thank you. God bless you. Thank you. Concrete Jungle, hello. Yes, Concrete says you can see he wasn't all there. Every picture looks like he's a deer in the headlights. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. If I could find any solace, I don't know how, maybe solace isn't the right word, but I do try to find a positive in every negative, you know? And at least he didn't murder his parents out of pure maliciousness, but rather due to his mental illness. And now I'm even more inclined to believe that his siblings hired that attorney. Because although they're devastated, brokenhearted, grief-stricken, they know that had not Nick suffered with schizophrenia, this probably would have never happened. And so thus, they're still supporting him in their devastating confusion, bewilderment, and grief. I will be saying a special prayer for them. And I'll be praying for you all too, as well as myself, that God comes and delivers and heals and helps us to make the right decisions and gives us wisdom in dealing with difficult situations and individuals. Amen. Peace.